Welcome back to Revenue Unplugged. Today we have with us John E. Hancock, who is the CEO and co-founder of Inviso AI, where he's helping companies accelerate growth and prepare for exit through AI-driven strategy execution. With a 30-year background in leadership, engineering, and advisory work, John combines deep operational experience with a forward-thinking product innovation. And at Invisio, he's bringing LLMs into enterprise environments, not just for automation, but to unlock decision clarity across the entire organization. He's also the founder of Bacaro Partners, where he advises VC-backed startups on go-to-market systems, strategy alignment, and leadership development. John, thanks so much for making time to connect. I've been excited to hear more about what you're seeing and the perspective that you're gaining. I've followed a lot of what you've been doing on LinkedIn. What did I miss there for the audience?
I don't know.
What didn't I hit on?
I started feeling tired when you read all that. It sounds like I didn't realize I was that busy, but yeah. I think I go crazy. You know how it is when you're an entrepreneur, you go nuts if you just play golf all day or something, So for me,
Yeah.
it's meaningful to have, purpose, work with other people. Just, work's meaningful. So it keeps me energized.
It's funny you said that. When I handed the reins over at eVisit, my plan was to take 5 years off and just be with my family.
Yeah.
And like 9 months in, my wife was like, "I love you so much. You can't be here before 5 o'clock in the afternoon." So before that, she was dropping little hints of like, maybe you should pick up a hobby. Maybe you should.
Yeah.
So anyway,
yeah, I know that feeling.
so I'd love to dive in specifically as we look at the impact that AI is having on the go-to-market motions. You're building Invisio's practice around natural language access to data. What's the most transformative impact you've seen this have in the go-to-market function specifically?
Yeah. So we back up and say the go to market for our clients, or from our perspective in terms of launching what we're doing.
I mean, either, but wherever you've seen the biggest impact, like as you've been advising.
You mean just as this space is opening up, just that marketplace? Yeah. Well, from the point, I always think about the mission, the point of the client. From that point of view, what am I solving? I jumped into it. Actually, the word Inviso was a derivative of the word envisage, which is, that have the courage to face the future, to go. So my empathy, and a lot of this came out of being a CEO and also sort of being, an amateur philosopher, if you will, and caring about, well, what's going to happen with culture, right? With people, because this, AI entering organizations is inevitable. So I developed this empathy for mid-market companies, let's say, that are in high growth areas, so financial services, tech companies, obviously, manufacturing companies, construction, you name it. We're doing work for Major League Baseball team right now. I don't know if I'm allowed to say who they are yet, but they're in the Northeast and they're north of New York. So, yeah.
Okay.
But yeah. So anyway, so I felt this empathy for C-suites, especially, and then particularly for CEOs, to navigate the governance, the ingestion of AI, where they could be free from operational overwhelm, just in general, even prior to AI. And think, as you know, think like a CEO without being stuck in the weeds, and which is a persistent problem prior to AI. But then I think if you compound it with, organizations moving into this more, let's just say, the concept of agentic, the the autonomous company and how that intersects with humans. They increasingly in these mid-market companies have a responsibility as a CEO, not just to think strategically, but to also be stewards of navigating that organizational dynamic. So I think the cultural part of it was in the empathy was motivating me. So and I think you'll relate to this because of I think what your company is doing, particularly in I think the SaaS domain is so the optics into the ERP systems, let's say. So you're running on NetSuite,
Mhm.
you have other systems of record, you might have ServiceNow, you might have, Salesforce, you might have something like that. So you're running on these systems of record, I call them, instead of systems of action. And you know what I mean there. And
Yeah.
and those things, we're increasingly creating automations, um, connectivity, even without AI, improving workflow. But the CEO at their level is having a hard time going and drilling down. Let's get my Power BI or Tableau right or Cognos right, or go and drill down, drill back up, and by that time, the um, the action that they needed to take is over, basically, right? And so, so the idea was to equip them with something easier, natural language interface, but then also compound, what comes along with that with, an LLM that's trained is you have a thought partner. And so we wanted, for example, somebody running a broadband services company that's emerging, competing with Cox or Comcast. They're out there doing bulk broadband for apartments, and then then they downstream they're supporting customers. But in that deployment of the project, that there's a construction dimension. So they're running on NetSuite. They need to see the CEO needs optics into, the resource planning, our people, truck rolls, people, those kinds of things getting there on time. They really can't do that through um, the traditional reporting tools. And
Yeah.
so does that
Uh,
make sense?
what makes perfect sense? What's your go-to tool set as you're helping surface or make this information more accessible
Yeah.
for your partners? What's the go-to tool set you run at?
Yeah. So and by tool set, you mean just in general our approach to the customer is, or do you mean
Yeah.
technical tools, or just in general?
And both,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Like as
our
you
approach has been, as a management consultant, I'll come in using that part of my background and do, do a discovery meeting, then follow up with a more of an asynchronous questionnaire, drill down on bottlenecks, KPIs, pain points that are prioritized in their mind rather than me speculating and trying to come in with more technology fatigue and just get level set. And then part of that is discovery on where they stand in terms of cultural readiness, in terms of data readiness, in terms of, and,
and what are you finding there, John? Like when you look at readiness, what are you where are you finding most organizations are at?
yeah, I mean, if I had to rank it on a scale of 1 to 10, um, within the context of the kinds of systems you and I are bringing in, I would say, on average, I would say be like a 3, right? In terms of new technology, because there's remedial work to be done on, um, API integrations, data cleansing, those things that need to be, ready for AI and for these kinds of tools, so that the tools aren't, you know, hallucinating, right? And so I don't know. What do you? I'm kind of curious now. What do you? Because you're experiencing something similar. What do you find in your experience so far?
I'm finding the desire is high. Let's call it 8 or 9. Like they know this needs to happen. Their uh, their preparedness is 3 or 4. Like they haven't thought through the framework they need to walk through
Yeah.
to prioritize and their experience or their ability, which is why we come to the table, is probably around a 2 or a 3, right? Like
Uh-huh.
every business is hearing that if they don't do this now, they're going to get left behind. It's a similar story as what I've heard parroted across every industry I've ever worked in. Like there is a fear of missing out
Yeah.
and what it means for their business if they don't. But I find that the ideas that customers generally have about what AI is capable of is pretty surface level, meaning
Mhm.
it goes far beyond drafting a blog post or responding to an email, or like when implemented correctly, the impact that it can have, the capacity that one can gain, and not to replace people, but to supplement the workflows that are already occurring and to bring information to them more quickly so that they can execute better informed,
Mhm.
uh, the best decisions for the business. So I think I would rank it on that kind of three-pronged scale:
Yeah.
desire, readiness, and ability. And I'd say the desire is high and the readiness and ability
Mhm.
are somewhat lower.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because your target, I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that your target market is within the SaaS industry primarily, not probably exclusively, but you have a heavy focus on that industry. So do you feel like,
That's our
yeah, I don't
target ICP
have,
today.
yeah, so I've got a probably a, probably got a range of, you came out of healthcare, so I'm avoiding enterprise healthcare. You know why?
Me
Uh,
too.
yeah. So, but there that's so, uh, the bureaucracy. I'll just, to be kind, I'll call it bureaucracy, but the bureaucracy there
Sure.
is just not worth the squeeze for early stage company like ours or yours to get traction. So, but financial services, again, the ones that have good psychographics, good leadership, manufacturing, construction, professional sports, whatever it might be, there's plenty of opportunity, but I feel like there's a variance on the parameters you talked about there are really pretty good, but I think on a um, I'm seeing variations based not so much based on industry because I'm across industries, but really based on sort of the psychographic of cultures
Yeah.
where they stand in their emergence as companies, right?
Have you spent much time with sales leaders on the implementation of AI, like in the go-to-market function?
Yeah, not a little bit, but not a ton, because
Are
we're
you
yeah, we're probably a step earlier in really launching our, BI product in earnest. You're ahead of us. We're launching that in earnest in January. And we're also launching another product simultaneous, which is a derivative, but just helping PE firms, run their M&A and knowledge graphs and those kinds of things. So we're kind of doing, and it has similar core technology, but we're deliberately moving there. Meanwhile, we've implemented, sort of, if I can say it this way, early or beta versions of our product in the context of companies that we're also helping with their roadmaps and AI agents and data cleansing. So, as an engineering company, so if you imagine Inviso as the engineering company, sort of like OpenAI is now realizing they need to do it. They need to place frontline engineers in companies, but they're doing this in
Mhm.
larger enterprises, and we're intersecting with them actually and collaborating at the professional sports team because the optics on the logo is good for them, but it's really kind of small for them, I think. But the OpenAI's consulting division on the engineering side, or Deloitte now partnering with Palantir, they're going after big guys. We're going after what I'd say small to medium sized enterprises that are not, VC, but PE backed type of, kind of
Yeah.
situations.
What are the specific outcomes as you walk through those engagements with your clients? What are the specific outcomes you're hearing pretty consistently? Like what is it that they're looking for or wanting to accomplish? And or is one of the things I'm finding is that if you hearken back to early days of SaaS, I remember hearing a lot of feature requests,
Yeah.
and eventually those feature requests turned into benefit requirements
Yeah.
or outcome requirements. And I'm seeing that again today, where it's like we need the button to be green, and
Yeah.
like the question you ask is like, why is it important that the button is green? Like, what is it that
Yeah.
you're trying to accomplish? Like, what are you hearing there?
Yeah. So let's go back to a previous question for context. Sales leaders, they end up becoming included. So if I'm working with the CEO of, say, a company that's 100 to 1,000 people, right? So if I'm working with the CEO, they're tucking in, you know, their C-suite for various things that they're concerned about. So I'm mostly looking at this sort of holistically from the balanced scorecard of a CEO, and they're prioritizing things that they know in their board meeting with the PE that they that there's the political concern of metrics they need to hit, for, I don't know, let's just say we need this to add up to, retention, let's say on sales for quality of earnings, right? Or we need for our EBITDA to bump. So, hey, can this streamline this bottleneck and at the same time increase our revenue per employee so that we can, shave off, a little expense there, right? So those are the kind of strategic objectives that they come to us with. And then we try to align projects or initiatives, regardless of technology, to fit that solve in those areas. Now, I think the BI tools are sort of a common framework for identifying what's going on and for them to be able to play sort of whack-a-mole, with their COO or their, or whoever, to
Yeah.
go, hey, you really ought to be on this one. But I'm really kind of putting them in the driver's seat. So back to your question, it's a variety of KPIs, but I think a lot of them are driven by, on the one hand, by the requirements of the board and, quarterly metrics, those kinds of things to get to the finish line, to grow the EBITDA, to get the exit for a PE firm, right? For in those instances. But
What
along the way,
is there a
the CEO is more balanced than that. They are concerned about the cultural things that finance bros don't necessarily get, and they just kind of like, but I need to do this. So they are concerned about the cultural things. And so the CEO tends to be the most kind of holistic thinker in the whole bunch, if that
Mhm.
makes sense.
Are you finding there are common complaints or pain points that you're being asked to
Yeah.
solve by your CEO target customer?
Yeah.
What are those?
I would say resource planning coming out of an ERP. So whether your it's your IT staff. Well, everybody has an IT staff at these companies, right? So whether you're deploying somebody to deal with a, cybersecurity threat or a network issue or whatever, that's still resource planning from a human perspective. We've got to get the right person on the job, and we need to know who they are. So if I had to use Tableau to look at ServiceNow and say Asana, it's like it'll take me, it's over before it happens, right? Analogous to that is if you're deploying a project, construction, let's say, it's the same thing. You've got resource planning issues. So you have resource planning data, let's say in NetSuite, right? But your your ability to get to it quickly, and um, in a way that's expressed action in an actionable way with maybe even some recommendations or prioritizations is not there in that kind of paradigm, right? So I think that's one answer is resource planning. And then let's move to an area that I think you're probably more focused on, I do get, so the growth engine, marketing, sales, customer service. Let's put aside lead gen and sales for the moment, but on customer service, yeah, they're concerned about keeping the North Star there in terms of our response rates good, and what's the correlation to, net promoter scores or CSAT, you know, because they want, it's retention, of earnings, and revenue. And then in terms of growth, on the sales side, the opportunities for renewals on accounts, those kinds of things that predictive analytics can surface, based on intent and timing and that kind of thing. A human brain that just, falls through the cracks, right? So that they're interested in those
Or
types
it
of
takes
things
so
too.
long to get the answers that you don't. eh, what I found, I mean, even in scaling eVisit, was every time a data-based question or a data-based thing happened, there's four questions that occur. The first is what happened. That's usually
Yeah.
pretty clear. The second is why. Sometimes that's clear. I found that that wasn't always the case. And the next two questions were never clear, which is what's going to happen and what will happen if.
Uh-huh.
And every time I had those questions, I'd stop and I'd do the calculation in my head of like, okay, if I need one of those answers to questions three or four, that's an expensive answer because it's going to take 4 to 5 weeks from one of my analysts, which is equates to 6 to 8 grand. And so
Uh-huh.
I'd have to stop and be like, is this a $6,000 to $8,000 problem, or should we? My gut's pretty good, and I've got pretty broad context on the business and the market and what's happening, and this is what my gut tells me. So it was always this constant tug of war between I want the data, I want
Uh-huh.
more confidence in what my gut's telling me, but can we afford time and money to get that confidence before we have to move forward?
Yeah.
Are
So
you
it's
finding
taken,
that's when you talk about getting answers out of the ERP, like and planning? Is that typically what
yeah, I mean,
you're
that's
finding?
really, that's actually pretty interesting. You're expressing that because, the cognitive load on a CEO to prioritize, which battle to fight to get data on is a burden operationally in and of itself, right? And so I think if you can, take the friction out of that, um, that's a big thing. I would agree with that. But, I
So
haven't I haven't
if
heard anybody
you're
express it as well as you did just then, but I think that's important to them. Yeah.
it happens when you try to sell it over and over and over again for for a year. Um, so you're one of your clients. You're starting out fresh. What's the one thing that you recommend these companies do as they're getting ready to get started that makes the whole process way more smooth, like and allows them to be successful?
Yeah, I think it's, getting alignment. Well, first of all, going through some shared vision through discovery and listening so that we map out holistically from the CEO's point of view. Always include the CEO, even if they want to include other people in this discovery deal. It only takes us, 10 business days to do this if they've got time. But then the output of that is then it becomes very important as a leader that they internally use that information and get, shared alignment on the executive team, so they're all singing off the same song sheet, right?
Are there any are there any specific blockers or pushbacks you're consistently seeing as the CEO brings their team around the table to focus on these
Yeah, it's
projects?
things that from your experience being in technology, you would get this, it's the typical, it's just the typical problems that you face as you navigate account-based selling, even though you might have the ear and the um, endorsement of the CEO, they're, they don't want to get sideways with their CIO or CTO, who, sometimes, you know, is, still catching up on AI, and they want to get their bearings, and, they want to feel like they have a voice. So sometimes we have to, take a step back, make sure we're aligned with the technology team. And to be fair, I think that's legitimate, because they understand the nuances of, the projects that they have that you're coming into. And in fairness, they're addressing, security concerns, governance, and then human factors for the UX around their existing systems, right? So if they're still trying to get employees to love using NetSuite, you know, and you're coming in over the top of that, then it's disruptive, and that ends up on a spreadsheet. It looks like a win because AI looks like a big win when you do the algorithm, but it's the human factors. So I would say, yeah, I think that's getting alignment on the executive team, as long as they have downstream, alignment. Um, I don't like to go in there and use this as a stimulus to get executive teams to work together for the first time. So that's not a win. But if they already work well together, then this still is a lift for them to get their heads wrapped around this as a shared vision, right?
Yeah. I found framing it, because we've seen similar pushback of people, maybe a little bit of fear about what this means for their role
Yeah.
in the go forward in the company, because there's so much noise about AI replacing people.
Yeah.
And the framing I typically try to use is like, hey, we still have a major role, the role in this, and it is arbiters of quality and accuracy,
Mm-hmm.
right? For always, right? Like the great companies are made because of great taste, and they provide great experiences. And today AI isn't great at crafting an experience that's trustworthy,
Mm-hmm.
and accurate, but it helps accelerate your taste and accuracy to the right point. Um,
I think that's a
maybe
good
maybe we'll
narrative.
wrap up with.
Yeah, I think that's a good narrative, because I
Go
think
ahead, John.
you go back to the context of a North Star, which is, what are you in business for? Everybody needs to be there collectively to serve a customer. And it's a reminder, like, this is what we're doing, right?
Yeah, 100%. So maybe we'll wrap with this one question, which is, what's the biggest pitfall or mistake, avoidable mistake you see happen as companies are working on, you know, evolving into the new operating models and the new tools in the operating models, and how would you avoid it, or what would you recommend they do to avoid it?
Yeah, I think it's ingesting tools from tool salesmen. So, the coming in there with, Databricks tools, or whoever tools you're using. I'm not picking on them, but coming in with tool sets that are going to be your framework, and models and tool sets that are going to be your framework. And then you ingest that and realize, hey, wait, I didn't need this and this. And so you suddenly have not just capital expense, but a lot of technology burden that didn't have anything to do. You're building a foundation, but you don't have an architecture of the house yet. So I think people are buying tools almost like it's a panacea. I trust the brand. I mean, it's Databricks. We don't know what to do. So you're trusting the technology without having an understanding contextually, and then that ends up being a fail.
Yeah. Well, awesome, John. Any last thoughts or anything else that you would highlight as you're, knee deep and, or maybe neck deep in helping
No, not
companies evolve
not
in this space?
not really. I learned a bit from this, and yeah, we should. You're still in Phoenix, right?
I'm not actually, as of
Oh,
like 10 days ago, we moved to Utah, so I'm
oh,
full
okay.
time up in Silicon Slopes now. I've gotten a few pieces of hate mail from Phoenix founders because of
That's
the
okay.
move, but
That's
I
okay.
promised myself
I
if
I
I
was just gonna say, "Hey, we should get together face to face," but that's gonna be harder now, so
let's do it. Next time I'm there, let's do it. And if you find yourself up, I will say I had to go back Monday to wrap up the move and like make sure the house was all taken care
yeah,
of. And man, even a week away, it is hot. It is so
it's
hot there. I was like, you would have thought, I mean, it was only been away for a week, but it
yeah,
feels like fall up in Utah by Phoenix standards. So, well,
yeah.
John, thank you so much for taking the
Thank you,
time.
yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah. For those of you listening, this is Revenue Unplugged. If you're looking for ways to jumpstart AI in your business, take a closer look at what we're doing and comment, like, subscribe.